everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's your girl Lori, and I am starting a new series this week. So for the next 5 episodes, we are going to be talking about boundaries. What are they? How to set them, how to respect other people's boundaries, various things. So today I wanted to start with where we should start, which is what is a boundary, right? So a boundary is a line that marks the limit of an area, right? So just think of it that way, right? It's just a line. It's a boundary, right? If you go up to a fence, that's a boundary. If you go up to something you can't overstep, police tape, anything like that, it's a boundary, right? That's exactly what a boundary is. So when it comes to you, so think of it that way. So always think of it as like, I am holding space for this. But then think of it about the limits that you are establishing for yourself that's going to help your mental sanity and your peace and your space. So think of a boundary as it's not a wall, and I'm going to talk to you about the difference of that too. As it's not a wall, it's a boundary. Means there's room to allow it to like grow, to allow a relationship to still be there, but that's only going to happen when you're kind of reiterating it, but you shouldn't have to reiterate it every day. That's going to come a point in time that we're going to talk about here when you start to establish them in the next video, because a lot of times when you start them, it's not like people are going to be like, oh, no problem, that's their boundary, never going to do that again. Like complete opposite of that, right? So let's talk a little bit about what are the types of boundaries, right? So you have your physical boundaries, you have your emotional boundaries, you have your time boundaries, you have your sexual boundaries, you have material and money boundaries. For some, it's spiritual boundaries, meaning what you believe in, you don't really want to try to change other people, but you're pretty standard. Like for me, I have to do my 5 journals. I have to do those things. That's my practice. And it really is non-negotiable. That is not a wall, but it is a hard boundary. Like I'm going to have that time in the morning for myself regardless. I mean, of course, if we're on vacation or something, I'm not going to be, well, that's not really true, because on vacation, I build it in at an earlier time. So I was going to say on vacation, I wouldn't do it, but I'm like, no, I just move my own boundary back, which is another key, is to respecting your own boundaries. Again, in the upcoming video this week. Here's the amazing thing about boundaries, right? I want you to think of it as, and I could talk about how like when I grew up, right? Like I'm 51, so maybe a little bit older than some people. But you know, haven't you ever heard somebody go, oh my God, you were such a good child? Like have you heard that? Or you've even maybe said, wow, you were such a good kid. Why? Because they were falling in line, because they weren't vocalizing how they felt, because they didn't kind of buck up against what the social norms were. That doesn't mean that they were a good kid. That could just mean that they were becoming codependent. And I think that that has happened, at least when I was growing up. It was the whole be seen, not heard, speak only when spoken to, kind of all of those things. And if you think about it, that's control, 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 control. So early on, you're kind of taught, like if you have boundaries, that's selfish. And that's something I need you to understand. Having boundaries is definitely not selfish. This does not mean, however, that people won't try to convince you that they are. And we will definitely talk about that when I talk about people trying to overstep your boundaries. And you also have to be mindful that just because you have a boundary that is said thing, and I'll talk to you about how you would label them, and it's just for yourself, so you'll be able to do that. Just because you have that boundary doesn't mean that somebody else is going to have that same boundary. And they may have a different boundary that you think, why would you have that boundary? It's not for you to know. See, when somebody reiterates it to you or they tell you what it is, they're telling you, hey, this is my boundary. It doesn't matter what you think of them. It doesn't matter if you like them. It doesn't matter if you hate them. But you have 2 choices in that. You would respect them, or you would say, okay, I can't get down with that. And then maybe that relationship is not meant to be. Friendship, spouse relationship, family relationship. And do not get it twisted that when you're establishing boundaries, it's not individual boundaries. You're not like, okay, these are my work boundaries. These are my home boundaries. These are my family boundaries. No, 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 no. This is why we're going to talk about how when you establish them. Yeah, I mean, you want to be a little flexible, but not to the point of sacrificing what is holding your peace. The whole idea of a boundary is to create a healthy relationship. And it really does. It fosters trust. It really does. It fosters trust, and it fosters healthy relationships. So when you have a healthy relationship, you can respect someone even if you don't agree with it. Again, if it's moral, it goes against your morals, or it goes really hardcore up against you, you don't really get to judge it. This is checking yourself. This is that ego death that I have a whole series on ego death. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean somebody has to change it for you, and vice versa. So this is where that sort of people-pleasing, fawn response might come in, where you're like, ooh, I don't know how they're going to take these boundaries. We're not worried about how they're going to take them. Mom doesn't get a separate set of boundaries than the neighbor next door. It is a boundary for you. Your boundaries aren't to harm others or try to make them feel bad or to manipulate a situation. Your boundaries are simply to protect your peace and allow you to show how much you love yourself. When you respect your own boundaries, which is another video, but when you respect your boundaries, your own boundaries, and you show up for yourself, that's a big sign of self-love. Okay? And so understanding what a boundary is in the first place, and the difference between a boundary and a wall, right? So a wall is if somebody has done you, or you feel is there somebody has done you wrong or dirty, and like you're angry and you go, I'm never talking to that person again and I'll never get in another relationship. That is not a boundary. That is a wall. And remember, the wall will protect you, but it can also imprison you. So the same walls that protect are the same walls that imprison you. So you want to be really careful about thinking that it's like super aggressive. Now, that's being said, if you have to cut somebody off because it is has become toxic for you, like really bad, more than likely it's going to be a progressive thing, right? Because sometimes we all do crazy things or things that are a little out of character, and you're almost like, ooh, that was a bit toxic. But it's not a standard practice. If you see, as Maya Angelou once said, if a person is telling you who they are by their actions, believe them. Stop trying to change them and understand them. See, that's the key, is when you have boundaries, you must also respect others. And when you respect others, you can say, I don't understand it, and you don't have to. But you don't have to beat your head up against the wall trying to understand it. That's ego. So that's that fine line between saying, okay, I just need to know so I can understand it. You don't really want to understand it. You think you do. Because if you understood it and somebody says, this is important to me, and you think, can't they just miss that for a day? Or why is that so important to them? They don't need to know. Okay, so a boundary isn't just about establishing it for self, but it's about being aware that not everybody, it's not a checklist of boundaries where it's like, oh, we all have the same boundary. They're going to be vastly different. So getting clear that boundaries are not manipulation, there's a fine line, kinda, but manipulation is, and I feel like it's important to tell you this since this is the like, what is the boundary thing, is manipulation is trying to use the boundary to get someone to change their behavior, right? So, hey, this is my boundary. Until you do this thing, I'm not talking to you. That's not a boundary. That's manipulation. So now you want them to change in order for you to do that. No. Now, the opposite of that is, as a healthy boundary, you say, okay, well, and let's say you're communicating it. Hey, you know, where you are, we're just on a different part of our journey, and it's not really in alignment with me. So I'm going to, this is my hard boundary, not line, but say hard boundary. And yeah, like I don't skew from that. You see what I'm saying? So that's the difference. Hold your boundaries. People don't have to like it. They will call you manipulative, but as long as you're doing so from a space of clear consciousness, groundedness, not anger. If you do it from anger and frustration, that's not a boundary, that's a wall. So that's the big difference within boundaries. And your boundaries can't be wishy-washy. You can't have a boundary this way today, this way tomorrow. Maybe you implement it here. Maybe you don't implement it there. Maybe, you know what I mean? So your consistency goes into self-love, goes into holding your boundaries. So you have to hold them regardless of what other people think of them. Okay? And again, vice versa. So in general, that's pretty much what a boundary is. So that's what we're going to talk about, because you hear people talk about my boundaries, don't overstep my boundaries, these are my boundaries, these are my and you're like, okay, well, like what does that mean? And I just literally told you. So it literally is a boundary. It is the definition of a boundary. It's what will you allow? And you have to understand, did you hear that last piece of it? What will you allow for yourself? Not from them. Don't be like, well, I won't allow my mom to do. No. What will you allow for you? So if your mom is disrespectful, or you feel as though your mom is disrespectful in certain ways, that should be equally aligned with the stranger down the street. Doesn't matter that you love her more. Doesn't matter that you know her more. Can't sit there and say, oh my God, it hurts so much more. I mean, it's going to be a little bit more personal, right? Because it's somebody who you've lived with all your life. But it doesn't prevent that boundary. So all in all, that is what a boundary is. So we're going to jump into exactly how to set them.